You're listening to localwebradio.fm.
Welcome to the Healthy Smiles Oral Health Show with Dr. Norm Ickert, brought to you by Ickert Dental Implant Centre, where they are committed to providing you with the very best in modern and advanced dentistry. Now, here's your host.
Hello, this is Nick Jaworski, and I am your host today, and I am here with Dr. Norm Ickert, director of Ickert Dental Implant Centre, and today we'll be talking about the different causes of tooth loss and trauma leading to tooth loss. Now, before Dr. Ickert joins us, just a reminder that if you have questions or require assistance, you can call Dr. Ickert's office at 604-881-1381. That's 604-881-1381. Dr. Ickert, it is great to be talking with you today.
Thank you, Nick. I always look forward to this time together with you.
All right, so now we've talked about implants before and the different kinds of grafting and how that works, but now we're going to talk just about what causes tooth loss. Sort of maybe a step we should have talked about before, but we're going to get all kinds of information about it right now. And so a great place to start would be what actually causes tooth loss.
Well, Nick, just to keep it really basic at this point, there are probably four major reasons for tooth loss. One is that a tooth is just congenitally missing. It just never formed genetically. Or you could lose a tooth, obviously, through trauma, an accident of some sort.
Right.
Thirdly, you can lose a tooth through dental disease, be it decay, where a tooth is just too far gone to be able to save it, or you can lose it through gum disease or periodontal disease, where the bone and the gum just loosens up so much around the root of the tooth that the tooth has to be eventually removed. You could have a mechanical failure, and we call this a structural compromise, where the tooth has had everything from a filling to a root canal to a post to a crown, and it just becomes so structurally weak from all the restorative dentistry that it fails and has to be removed.
Okay, well then let's go back to that first one when we talk about congenital absence. What does that mean? And I guess maybe how does that play out? When do we find out that there's not a tooth there? What happens?
Well, it can happen at various stages, because you could either have your baby tooth missing, and if your baby tooth is missing, there is no way that you can have an adult tooth. But sometimes you can have a baby tooth but no adult tooth. So you find out at different stages of development.
Wow.
But it's not uncommon, actually, for a tooth or even several teeth to be congenitally absent. Most commonly, it's the baby tooth that is still present, but there isn't the permanent successor following it to replace it. And this is most often then determined at the time when the baby tooth is ready to fall out. So that can happen anywhere during adolescence. It can happen anywhere from, roughly speaking, 10 to 14 years old. However, many times this baby tooth, which doesn't have an adult successor, can stay in place for a relatively long time and can still function. And sometimes it can function for a patient well into their 40s or 50s.
Oh, wow.
And it basically just falls out at that point, or is taken out because there is no more root left and the tooth just becomes so loose that it has to be removed.
Well, how do you, the dentist, figure out that there isn't an adult tooth hiding in there somewhere?
Well, most often it's determined when we take our routine dental x-rays. And especially during the adolescent years, when you notice that there isn't a new tooth that's forming above the baby tooth, that would make you question it, and then you might take a little different type of radiograph or x-ray that scans the entire mouth, and then you can actually tell if there is a tooth bud present or not. Sometimes it just takes longer for a tooth bud to come into play, but with these overall panoramic scans, you can get a great overview of what's about to come, even in the future, in terms of any additional teeth. And sometimes people have even more than one adult tooth, so they have an extra adult tooth. So there's all different variations that are possible.
Wow. Now, what kind of delay might someone see between losing a baby tooth and waiting for that adult tooth to grow in?
That is a really interesting question, because the longer it takes for the adult tooth to come in, the greater the chance of the teeth to shift or changes to occur.
Oh.
Or there can even be cysts and other soft tissue pathologies that can develop when the normal eruption pattern isn't happening naturally.
So obviously something, even if there's a tooth hidden somewhere, if it's not coming out pretty soon, something is going to have to be done.
Absolutely, because like I mentioned, there is such a dynamic shift that can take place that, the other teeth which are already in the mouth can be negatively affected by this, either from an aesthetic standpoint or from a functional standpoint in terms of the bite. So it really is important to have all your teeth accounted for, and if you are missing teeth, it's also important to really have a proper timing and treatment plan in place as to when is the best time to replace these teeth.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, are there teeth that are more commonly missing than other teeth?
Actually, there are, Nick. I would say the most common missing tooth congenitally is the upper lateral incisor, which is the tooth right next to the central incisor. That's what we see the most often, and also what we call the premolars. Premolars are the last baby teeth, and they are the teeth that are just in front of the first molar, and those are the ones that we will oftentimes see missing. And of course, there are wisdom teeth that are missing as well in many people as we are developing in our ways that it's becoming more and more common for this microevolution to occur where wisdom teeth are being selected out of our normal dentition.
And is there a reason why that, like, you might be missing those incisors? Is that just environment? Is it genetics? Is it just chance?
At this point, it's totally genetic. There's actually a genetic code for each tooth. And if that genetic code is not there, then the body will just simply not produce that tooth bud. And then if you don't produce the tooth bud, the bone in that area is also not produced. So there is a lot of sequelae, or a lot of consequences that occur when this genetic variation takes place. And it's actually interesting to say that it's actually been discovered now that if you can get this genetic code, you can actually regrow the teeth that are missing by just reprogramming the genetic code. So this is where it's heading with tissue engineering. And so that if you are missing teeth, that hopefully we can actually modify the genetic code in such a way that it will then actually produce the teeth and the bone and the gum for the area that it was previously missing.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, we're going to take a quick break. I'm here with Dr. Norm Ickert. And when we come back, we're going to be continuing our conversation about tooth loss and particularly trauma and other factors that can contribute to it. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
More Healthy Smiles with Dr. Norm Ickert from Ickert Dental Implant Centre after this.
Take control of your financial future with sound investing with Byron Stryloff, Senior Investment Advisor and Chartered Financial Planner with over 30 years of experience on the Business Channel on localwebradio.fm.
Shopping for the lowest mortgage rate? Looking to refinance? Catch the Mortgage Newscast with Jared Dreyer on the Business Channel on localwebradio.fm. Buying or selling a home on the Semiahmoo Peninsula? Catch up on local market conditions on This Week in Real Estate with Lance and Connie Marples from Sutton West Coast Realty on localwebradio.fm. To schedule a face-to-face consultation, you can reach Lance and Connie at 604-538-8888. That's 604-538-8888. And visit them online at www.surrey-whiterrockhomes.com.
It's time now for more Healthy Smiles with Dr. Norm Ickert.
All right, we are back with Dr. Norm Ickert, and we're talking about what causes us to lose a tooth in the first place. Now, Dr. Ickert, one of the other things you mentioned at the top of the show was just trauma, hockey injuries, soccer injuries, you slip and fall on the ice, something like that. So how does just the trauma to the tooth contribute to the actual loss of the tooth?
Well, like you mentioned, there are so many different ways that you just said, or even a child falling off their bicycle, or anything that can happen to us can cause teeth. They get in the way. Obviously, if you can't get your hands down to protect your face, the teeth are probably the first thing to go.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the trauma doesn't completely knock out the tooth, and the problem may not even become evident for years. You might just get lucky, but eventually, something will usually happen. Either the tooth will turn dark, or the nerve will die, or even the root itself can actually begin to dissolve with a resorptive process, and this can happen years down the road. Or you can have a slight root fracture in the tooth that was traumatized, and it doesn't become apparent till years later when all of a sudden there's an infection that develops. So oftentimes the damaged tooth can be treated just simply for the loss of tooth structure, and it appears to be doing quite well at that time. But oftentimes much later is when you see the actual final consequences of this trauma. In a way, sort of the body turns against itself oftentimes and has a cellular activity that almost eats at the root surface, and this defect can actually become quite large and quite painful and needs to be managed. So it's really important that if you bump a tooth when you're young, or if you have an accident, or even if you have an insurance claim, that you really realize that what you see at that point isn't necessarily what it will be like years down the road.
And just to clarify, is that the outcome that could happen without treatment, or would even going to the dentist after this trauma, is that something that they could help avoid early on, or is that just going to happen with time after the trauma?
When the trauma happens, the damage is done.
Okay.
And going to the dentist is really important to first of all, to eliminate any further injuries that might not be apparent. So I think a really thorough examination, including a radiograph, is really critical. But the dentist at that time is basically trying to manage the trauma, maybe add some material to make the tooth look a little bit nicer, or deal with the nerve that might have been damaged. But the damage to the tooth has been done, and now it's just a matter of waiting until the rest of the story unfolds, and that could be years down the road.
All right. Now, besides some of the things we've already talked about in terms of sports injuries or falling off a bike, are there any other examples of what could cause trauma to a tooth?
Well, besides the sports accidents and the car accidents and all the things that we do just under normal conditions, I guess there are a few more things. A tooth can be damaged even just during a surgical procedure, a difficult surgery, trying to remove a tumor, or trying to retrieve a tooth that isn't in the right position. That can potentially damage an adjacent tooth, which might lead to tooth loss. And of course, there are even more serious injuries that can be caused by blunt or ballistic objects that can create wounds and obviously affect our teeth.
Now, you also mentioned earlier disease and mechanical failure as other reasons for tooth loss. And could you just sort of elaborate on what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, dental disease primarily is known as dental decay and gum disease. These are very serious diseases that still haven't been solved throughout the entire world. And they are both bacterial in nature, but they are completely different bacteria that affect the teeth. And of course, it's a very intricate process that with gum disease, it's considered to be more of an autoimmune disease. And with tooth decay, the bacteria in the mouth digest the food that we take in, that produces acid as a byproduct, and that acid in the right environment can break down our teeth and cause the so-called dental decay. And so if this dental decay progresses to the point where the tooth just cannot be saved because there's too much damage, then of course the tooth has to be removed. So managing tooth decay at the earliest possible time is critical. So even something as simple as a fissure sealant can greatly prevent tooth loss for an adult in the future, because the initial decay doesn't get a foothold on the biting surface of the tooth. So sealing these teeth in at an early age, let's say between 6 and 9 years old, is really a very important preventive strategy. Gum disease is actually a very complicated disease, and our whole goal of trying to treat gum disease is to slow down the process, because we can't actually stop the process. It's just that we're trying to slow it down